Riley Kidder was here. I interviewed him like I'm doing with you, and he talked about the trip to D.C. and how you were the star of the show on the bus down, talking about all of the Civil War battlefields as they were driving down the way.
Right.
First of all, how did you get interested in the Civil War? Was that
because I was forced into it.
Really?
I knew we were going down to, I'm interested in all the history, but I zeroed in on the Civil War because we were going on the trip and Raleigh wanted me to MC it on the bus. So I went to the library and I studied about the Civil War. I found that the buses had tapes on there where you can show movies. So I found some a great movie on the Civil War, factual movie, and I took it out at the library for the event, and I had my talk all set up, and so we got on the bus and proceeded down. We picked up all the people. The last of them were in Warren, Pennsylvania, and we proceeded down to Washington, D.C. So that's when it was my job to take over and start briefing them on the Civil War, because there were a lot of battle sites along the way, and we thought it'd be an interesting subject. Anyway, the occupants of the bus weren't in the mood to see the movie right off the bat. So they said, let's save the movie for when we come back. But I did the talk going down and talked about the various battle sites, that there were over 10,000 skirmishes during the Civil War. Most of them were in the South, because the South, they fought a defensive war. And the only time they went into the northern part was to harass the Northerners, and then they ran back, they horsebacked to the South and went into hiding. But it was there was a lot to talk about, and we went through Gettysburg, and that was interesting, and so I talked about Gettysburg, which was a very important battle, and they seemed to enjoy it. And they really enjoyed the movie coming back, and the bus driver was real happy, because he asked me a lot of questions too after, during break time, and it turned out nice.
What was your natural interest in history? Was that something that you're lifelong?
Well, yes, because my hobbies were, as a child, they were coin stamp collecting, and then I went to work for a stamp company, and worked at the Jamestown Stamp Company for 45 years, worked my way up, and my interest was history, and stamps and coins are history. So you look at every stamp, it has history on it, just about. But history's always been my favorite subject.
So how did you connect with Riley Kidder and Franco Bato and the Jackson Center?
Well, Franny and Tom Bato, they were childhood friends. I started dating my wife in junior high school, Actually, I didn't go to her house till I was in sophomore. But she was my girlfriend in junior high school. And I started to go over her house at the age of about 15. Maybe once a week I'd go over. And Tom Bato the Batos lived right in the alleyway. They lived on one side of the alleyway, the corner house on Harrison Street, and my wife lived in the other house right across the way. So I knew Tommy and Fran from those days. Fran, her parents ran Berjoda's grocery store on Derby Street, and my aunt and uncle, the Ciancio brothers, they bought the store from Berjoda's. It was during the late 40s, I believe, and Berjoda's then moved to South Main Street, right next to Johnny's Lunch. That was a real hot spot. And Franny's sister, older sister, ran the store at that time, but Franny worked for her. But then the sister sold the store to Franny and Tom. And that's after Tommy got out of the service. Incidentally, I did have a chance meeting with Tom Bato when I was stationed in Korea. I was a stenographer at 8th Army headquarters, and I attended a movie one night, and lo and behold, after the movie, people were coming out of the theater, and there was Tom Bato, and then there was Russell Sardi, my other childhood friend from Woolard School, grade school. So we had a chance meeting, and he was working, he was a sergeant, I believe a staff sergeant at the time, in transportation. Russ was also stationed there. I forget what his division was, but I was in ordnance. And we got together quite a bit during our stay in Korea. That was right after the war.
So, you know the Batos from here, and was it Fran that got you interested in Jackson Center?
Well, yes. Actually, we started the Lost Neighborhood. You've heard the Lost Neighborhood. Yeah. And we worked closely with each other. And Tom mentioned to me that the Jackson Center was looking for an office manager. And he said, why don't you go up and see what it's all about? So I said, well, I'm not really interested in going back to work because I had retired. And but I said, I'll go up there. And I said, who do I see up there? They said, ask for Riley Kidder. He was the director at the time. So I went up there and talked to Riley, and there was nothing definite, but he showed interest. And he said, well, think about it. I said, I'm not looking for a job. I said, per se, a full-time job. I said, I'll think about it, I told him. So he said, well, you think about it and get back to me and we'll talk further. When I went back, I told him, Riley, I said, I really don't want a job. I said, I thought about it. And he said, well, how about volunteering your time as a docent, and you'd work for Franny. She's a head docent here. And I said, yeah, that sounds interesting. I said, I like history, and I don't have a lot to do right now, so I'll try it. So that's how I got involved.
So, as you're diving into that, did you know anything about Robert Jackson?
I knew of Robert Jackson. I think anyone that knows, that's interested in history or does any research, knows about Jackson. I knew a lot about the Nazis, and I did hear of Robert Jackson, and but I had to learn.
Yeah.
Just like, and then the first thing Raleigh said, well, here are the books. He had he was surrounded by books in his office. He said, you can start reading. So that I did.
You know, and when would that have been, Jim? About what time frame? We started the center in 2001, just to give you a benchmark.
Well, I was trying to pinpoint it. I think it was about 2004, maybe 2003, something like that. I volunteered for about 4.5 years, I think.
I know we had some historically interesting people come through during that time period.
Tremendous. The best benefit I think you can have is when an organization like the Jackson Center starts off, because everything is new, and and we had to do a lot of things on our own at first, kind of wing it, and first thing I had to do was learn about the family, the Kent family, and so forth, and then we met a lot of interesting people. I was lucky to be there at the start of the Jackson Center, because that's when I had the opportunity to meet living legends like this gentleman here, Whitney Harris.
Yes.
That's when I think you gain the most when you start off an organization. You work live with. I worked with Whitney on a couple of his books.
Did you?
And there were 3 books, I think, that he wrote, and I worked with him on all 3 of them, I think.
How did that happen? Did he send the manuscripts to the center or to Raleigh, and then would you proofread them? Would you edit them in some way?
Yeah, I had to proofread it, and I wasn't an editor, but I did the best I could. Right. The one experience we had on one of the books, unfortunately, we were having this one publisher do it, and everything was perfect. I was working right with the people. Everything was just right. Proofread the book. I don't know how many times. Brought it back for publication, and lo and behold, they changed the type, the size of the type. I think it's the second book, and it threw the reference pages off. And Whitney, I know he was upset, and I was very upset, because it was my responsibility to make sure everything was just right. And he said, how did this happen? I said, Mr. Harris, I says, they changed the type. They changed the size of the type, which threw all the pages off. So that's how that happened. But then the last book I remember I worked on, it was done in Faulkner Printing, and they did a real professional job, and I made sure they didn't change the type on that one.
Yeah, that was the one, was that the one dealing with Rudolph Hearst, the commandant of
Yes,
Auschwitz?
I believe that's the one, yes.
Yeah, that was amazing.
But I've got the books at home. I went through a lot of memorabilia. I just took a few things. Like I said, you're so fortunate when you can have living legends, talk to living legends. And I was fortunate that during the time that I was docent, they were still living, and I used to talk to them and get a lot of information from them directly. And that's what made it so great, and listening to their talks at the Jackson Center.
I see a picture of Phil Donahue.
Phil Donahue, that's that's a picture of me with Phil Donahue. He was quite a guy, quite a legend in his time. But
and he was here a couple of times, but
oh yes,
initially was with his interview with Albert Speer.
Mm-hmm.
Remember, he did that television interview, and the place was packed.
Right. And then Aaron Beckwith, he had his movie, he showed his movie on Follow the North Star. He signed it here.
You remember, Jim, how he, on occasions, he did this every year for a while.
Yes, he did.
And one year he told all of the students, 200 people, they should go downstairs right now and take a tour of that Underground Railroad area. Remember that?
Yes, I remember that. And I remember when I was a docent, I used to take them downstairs into the basement, and the parents that would come with their children, they said their kids just loved it down the basement there because it was so secretive and scary. There was I don't know what club it was.
The Masons, yeah.
The Masons, they had a skeleton down there. And I always made sure the kids would see the skeleton, and they just loved it, They couldn't get over that. I assured them, though, that it wasn't Robert H. Jackson.
I hadn't thought about that in a while, but that's true. We had to walk all the way down through the kitchen, and then in that passageway, and the Masons had all of their memorabilia stacked up there.
Yes.
And there was a casket,
yes.
A skeleton, oh my God.
Yeah, but we used to wing it a lot and do things that we thought would spice up the tour. And that was one thing when the kids were with their parents, I always made sure I took them down into the dungeon rooms.
Well, and you were good at what you did, Jim.
I don't know how good I was, but I did the best I could. I always tried to do the best I could. I wasn't as good as some of these docents, but I got by.
Did you remember any other personalities that you saw during that time period? Were you here when Rehnquist was here?
When who?
Rehnquist were you? That was 2003, so that may have been a little before you.
No, I think that was a little bit before me.
Yeah. And then we had all those prosecutors and James Meredith.
Yes, right, civil rights. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Those people.
In fact, I think I have a picture of him in the office. Riley was good enough to let me take over and go in the office with him and talk to him. So I was in there and I talked to him one-on-one for about 15 minutes before the action started. But I had a lot of great times there. One time I remember, this is funny, we had some doing there, you were there, and I didn't have, I had just started, and I didn't have the security code and so forth to close up the place. But all the action happened, you left, and all the people left, and all of a sudden I found out that I was the only one there, and I didn't know how to lock up the place. So I said, what am I going to do? So I called my wife and said, you know something? I said, I might have to stay here all night. But I said, I'm going to try to get hold of Franny. So Franny Bato. So I was lucky enough to get a hold of her, and I said, Franny, I'm still here at the Jackson Center and everyone abandoned me, and I don't know how to lock the place up. So would you please come and lock the place up so I can go home? So she said, I'll be there in about 45 minutes. So she came in there and she says, you come out to the car because I'm afraid it's all dark there. And then you escort me in. I'll lock up and then you escort me back to the car. I said, okay, Fran, I'll do that. So I did that, and I never forgot that.
I never heard that story.
Yeah.
Wow. That would have been something you spending a night.
Oh, well, that would have been nothing. I'm a night owl anyway. I would have just found a spot near the door and hoped that if somebody came in unauthorized, I'd wake up. I don't know what I could have done, but.
That's funny. So you worked, there was Raleigh there at the time. Was Carol Drake?
Carol Drake, she was terrific. And Becky, Becky Robbins, they were just terrific. I had known Carol before. She had worked in some office that I had contact with her years before, and I knew her.
She worked for Dr. Ney for a while.
That's what it was. I had an allergy and went to Dr. Ney, and she was running the office at the time. But Carol I've known for years and years. She was very competent, did a good job.
Who were some of the other docents at the time? We know Fran. Was Ann Cole, was she one of them?
Yes, she was. Franny Ann Cole. I looked at the picture that I took with Raleigh and Franny and the other couple of docents, and unfortunately I can't remember the names of the other
Carolyn
two.
Volk, was she there?
Yes, I think she was.
Steve Massa?
No, I took Steve Massa on a tour with his brother one time.
Okay.
And then he talked to me after. He said, Mr. Auria, he says, I think I'd like to be a docent. He said, I think, because he likes history, and he said, I think I could do a good job. So Steve became a docent, and boy, he became one of the best, I'll tell you. He really did a job for the Jackson Center.
Did you ever listen to his program downstairs? You know, we had those perpetrator exhibits.
Yes.
So Steve really took that on as a cause.
Yes, yes. I always used to love those sayings that Jackson wrote, and I'd bring the people down there and go over it with him. He was a great writer, just wonderful, just wonderful. I often think too bad that he died so young, because he could have been there. He could have been there at the start of the Jackson Center. Maybe not. But Whitney Harris was probably a lot younger than him at the time.
Yeah.
But
Did you meet Henry King? Henry King, was he part of your world? Another Nuremberg prosecutor who came through.
Yes, I remember. I think I met him also. I was there when Hillary Clinton came. I'm thinking. There was a guard at Nuremberg that that came as a guest one time and talked on his experience. I remember that. But there were so many civil rights people that I really enjoyed.
You there with John Doerr? He was a prosecutor. He's the guy that got James Meredith into Mississippi. He was there. Dorothy Cotton, who was the secretary to Martin Luther King. She was there. All those people around Brown versus Board of Education. I don't know if you were around then, but that was huge. But I know that you were always one of the go-to guys when we wanted to bring in a group, special people, Jim Auria. Jim there.
Well, I did the best I could do. That's all I could say. I was an average Dolson.
You read a lot. You read a lot.
But I enjoyed it. I learned a lot. I met a lot of great people, and you're included. You're an institution around town here. You're my kind of guy, though. I like to stay busy myself, and I do things, and I always like to read and write.